Welcome to the AfroDebt podcast, produced by the African Forum and Network on Debt and Development. In this podcast, we commingle with extraordinary intellects, discussing debt-related issues as we forge ahead in helping African governments to borrow responsibly and spend wisely. We are beginning a series on debt and elections, and our guests will mainly be from countries that have elections this year. Hello everyone, this is Wanjiru Gikonyo and I'm your host for this AfroDebt podcast, the show that brings you the public debt conversation for people who love to see Africa rewrite her story as a rule maker and not a rule taker. We're super excited because in this debt and election episode, we're privileged to host a special guest, that is Wanjiru Gikonyo, who is the national coordinator of the Institute for Social Accountability, which is also part of the Okoa Uchumi Kenya Debt Coalition. We are discussing the upcoming Kenya elections and how the Okoa Uchumi Coalition, spearheaded by TISA, is enhancing the public discourse and promoting public awareness on public debt issues and elections in Kenya. Let's do this. Wanjiru, it's such a delight to have you on our podcast today, and maybe we can begin with you acquainting our audience with who you are, what you do, and maybe why you do what exactly you do.
Lurit, it's a pleasure to meet you and a pleasure to be on this podcast, and I love and admire AfroDebt's work, so I'm also excited to be here. I'm Wanjiru Gikonyo, National Coordinator with the Institute for Social Accountability, and we focus on local governance, strengthening citizen voice to hold government accountable for effective service delivery. In the course of our work, we realized that the devolution project that Kenya is undergoing, which entails a transfer of powers, functions, resources to the local level to strengthen accountability, to strengthen responsiveness of development, we realized that devolution was suffering. And we witnessed a major strike in the health sector because of inadequate funding, because of the failure of the national government to transfer adequate resources to the county governments. When we drilled down into the problem, we realized the problem was a crisis around the fiscal shortage, a deficit of resources due to heavy debt repayments. When we did our further investigations, we realized Kenya was in a debt trap. And we felt it was important for us to get involved in the conversation because we are aware of the negative impacts of the previous debt crisis of the 1990s and the structural adjustment programs that came on board and the devastating long-term impacts they had on the development trajectory, especially in the social sectors of our countries. So we put together the Okoa Uchumi campaign, invited other civil society partners who work in budget monitoring, who work in policy monitoring, and under this coalition we've been tracking debt. So we serve, the Institute for Social Accountability serve as the conveners. So this very long introduction serves to introduce the Institute for Social Accountability, TISA, who are also conveners of the Okoa Uchumi campaign that's campaigning for accountability in public debt in Kenya.
All right, thank you very much, Wanjiru, for that introduction. It's very clear that TISA and the Okoa Uchumi Coalition is at the forefront of ensuring public participation in matters to do with public finance and even debt management in general. I think maybe now we can just get right into the major bit of these questions today and what we're really in to discuss at this juncture. And it's majorly to relate what public discourse, public awareness looks like beyond the elections and what really we need as a country and whether this can be replicated across Africa. Is it meaningful for the same? And can this journey towards public participation actively serve as a model to ensure that different stakeholders participate in fiscal consolidation and the economic system in general?
Yeah.
So maybe just my first question, if you look at the Okoa Uchumi Coalition, this name is very interesting because it directly translates to save the economy. Could you maybe just tell us why this name? Why is it so important to TISA? How did you guys come up with it?
Right. Okoa Uchumi, yes, save the economy. We came out, that name was actually coined by one of our partners, Abraham Lugo, who's the ED of the International Budget Partnership. And as a coalition, when we were thinking about the debt crisis and the fact that in Kenya the debt crisis has been caused by budgeted corruption, it's been caused by the violation, the failure to comply with the public finance management system. It's been caused by, misplaced policy priorities, under the guise of development. It's been placed by imbalanced spending, where government is spending in sectors that are not bringing in the returns that they should. And so when we were grappling with the multiplicity of factors that have contributed to the debt crisis, we wanted to coin a term that captured the extent of the problem, but also had a proactive element that would take us forward. Because by the time we started organizing around the public debt crisis in late 2019, the fact that Kenya was in a debt crisis was already an established fact. It was an admitted fact. The previous Treasury Cabinet Secretary had admitted as much. There had been a change of guard in the Treasury. The new CS had come in, had also admitted as much. All the experts we knew we were in a crisis. I think the argument was the extent of the crisis and the remedies. And there we were not really getting a very clean picture from the Treasury. We were not in agreement with the IMF's diagnosis of the issues, but we knew we were in a crisis and it had been caused by a number of factors. So we coined the term, we took on the term Okoa Uchumi because we felt not only do we want to deal with the public debt crisis, we also want to deal with accountability in our financial systems. We also want to deal with sustainable economic policies and decision making, and we want to deal with effective oversight and effective participation of the people. So in our view, saving the economy entails all of this, really transforming the way we do our budgeting, the way we do our planning, and strengthening our accountability mechanisms, and ensuring that our economic systems are aligned to our needs, are based on a positive culture, positive expression of who we are supporting the majority of Kenyans and not a minority of Kenyans. So really, we want to save the economy by transforming.
Yeah. Right. I'm thinking something very interesting for me right now, mostly about transformation in the lens of transparency, accountability, efficiency, and even just participation in general. But there's something very interesting that we've been seeing within the Kenyan financial ecosystem, and it's mostly the Citizens Manifesto. And that's mostly on public accountability, public debt accountability, and economic justice. And it comes out clearly that the manifestos are mostly a concerted voice of citizens in various diversities, and they're mostly calling for what you've just talked about. At this juncture, what are the citizen manifestos about, and what is the end goal of these manifestos?
You've got many good questions, and we came up with the idea of a citizens manifesto because, of course, Kenya is in a election period. We are going to elections in a few days, and when we were at the end of last year, we were aware that we're going to have a change of guard. We were aware that the incoming government is going to inherit a badly broken budget system, a badly broken public finance system, broken in that we've got a massive fiscal deficit, we've got runaway expenditure, we are spending almost 70% of all our revenue collection repaying debts. Then in our view, and by government's own admission, we are losing about 1/3 of our budget cannot be accounted for. So we've got major corruption, we've got major leakages in terms of our revenue collection. Maybe as much as another 1/3 of our revenues are lost due to illegal exemptions, kind of politically motivated exemptions and avoidance and various other aspects. So, Kenya is a paradox in that we have a very progressive constitution, very progressive public finance management system, very progressive provisions on accountability and kind of democratizing our processes, but at the same time we've got a very regressive political culture that's very enmeshed with private interests. So the political economy between politics and government has continued to undermine the aspirations of people and of the people and to undermine our development plans. So because of this, we felt it was important for us to get involved in the political conversation. Previously, a lot of the institutions that are part of the Okoa Uchumi Coalition have been active in budget monitoring, participation in the national budget process, building capacities of citizens to take part in the budget process, giving submissions to parliament and institutions like ourselves have even gone to court, others serving as advisory, giving advice to the committee. So we're very involved in the public participation. But this has not resulted in, we haven't seen a corresponding uptake of our submissions and our concerns. And with the change of guard, we felt it was important for us to frame the extent of the problem. We also felt it was important for us to get into agenda setting mode so that we can engage the political parties, let them know there is a problem, we're aware, and we expect them to do something about it. So that's where the idea of the Citizen Manifesto came from. In terms of the issues in the Citizen Manifesto, we had a lot of back and forth on this because we've got several papers that we've developed and there's many issues, a multiplicity of issues, but we felt that it was important for us to distill a few critical issues that we felt were not being given the attention they need. Because government knows there's a debt crisis. I think there's admission we have an expenditure problem. There's admission that we've got loopholes in the revenue side. So we felt we're not going to regurgitate what government is already saying in its own policy papers and what its political actors are already speaking to. We wanted to hone in on those aspects of governance and accountability that the political elite tend to shy away from. So we stressed, for instance, the issue of transparency. We stressed the issue of effective oversight. We stressed the issue of tax justice. And I'm forgetting the fourth item. But we have, a call for deepening accountability in the public finance. Actually, we have called for an overhaul of the way we manage our public debt and an overhaul of the public finance system to ensure public participation and accountability.
Right. Right. I think it's very interesting to learn, especially about the Citizen Manifesto. And its anticipated impact in different regions across Kenya and even just the country at large, in terms of how debt and finances are managed, not only by the government, but even in terms of bringing in different stakeholder voices in ensuring effective oversight, effective management, and just interaction with the whole process at large. Now, what I'm getting from you also is that the Okoa Uchumi Coalition and even how TISA works really depends on collaborative efforts with different stakeholders at the same time. And as you come up with different manifestos, there's the Harare Declaration that even Aphrodite has been able to largely pioneer. How does your manifestos and the manifestos you've been able to curate relate with such manifestos across the globe? Is there room for them to collaborate or fight for the same things and also be replicated across different areas in the continent?
Right. So two things. With the manifesto that we generated, we then have also, apart from sharing the manifesto with political actors, we've also taken them down to the county level. And we held what we were calling regional economic bloc trainer of trainers, where we had conversations with civil society groups across, I think in total we reached possibly 15 counties, aggregated at what we call the regional economic bloc level, where we were sharing the agenda with these county-based civil society so that they can take the message down to the ground, so that we're not only having the conversation at the national level, but we're also having the conversation at the county level. And some of these resulted in subsequent county level manifestos that were dealing with county level issues, but also bringing in the issue of debt. Now, in terms of the regional connections, one of the ways we benefit from Aphrodite's work, of course, is in terms of borrowing some of the learnings. We also benefit from Aphrodite's work in terms of, some of the provisions that Aphrodite has been championing at the regional level for national level countries, Kenya already has in law. Like I said, Kenya has a very progressive legal framework and a progressive public finance framework. So when we looked at some of the principles on debt accountability, transparency, we found, Kenya ticks the box on paper, but not in practice. So we are really trying to advocate around the culture. But in terms of the Harare Declaration and, Africa as the rule maker, it's been of interest to us. We've learned a lot from Aphrodite in terms of understanding the regional framework. It helps us in terms of how we engage with the IMF, with the World Bank. We haven't yet begun engaging with the African Development Bank. I think we've attended some of their events and hope to also strike up a stronger collaboration. So as we engage with the World Bank, as we engage with the IMF, we are pushing for increased accountability at national level while joining in solidarity with Aphrodite at the regional level. So we are very happy to be part of the regional campaign. We espouse and champion those aspirations at the local level. So when we've engaged with political actors, we stress this issue of Africa as the rule maker. We support the recommendations, for instance, around the Dove Fund, where Africa can have a fund to support African countries. So we support that. We are very aware, maybe two other things. One is we are aware about the development philosophy that's been championed by the Bretton Woods institutions, stressing on infrastructure-led development and how this has really been a big factor in reversing the gains, the economic gains that African countries were enjoying in the 2000s, through heavy borrowing for the wrong type of infrastructure development. So we are very keen to work more effectively with our regional partners to articulate that yes, we want infrastructure development, but those infrastructure projects have to be linked to the local economy, have to be linked to the economies that create jobs. That the problem with mega infrastructure projects that are totally dependent in terms of technology, in terms of inputs, that are totally dependent on the international financiers in all aspects. These type of projects are impoverishing us. So we need to rethink how we deal with mega infrastructure and get solutions that create jobs, that rely on cement made by and iron and steel products that are available locally or regionally, so that as we engage in large-scale infrastructure, it's creating jobs and it's building our local economies. We have unfortunately been exporting jobs. And when we did our analysis in Kenya, we found a lot of our borrowing is exporting jobs. And it's caused a major exchange rate challenge when a major distortion in terms of our macroeconomic policy. Africa, the rule maker, is really important, but not to create dependency on external borrowing, but to create responsible borrowing and to ensure that the investments that African countries make are generating revenue, are creating jobs, are sustainable. So we are very happy to be part of the initiative and hope to be even more so in the coming years.
Right, that's very great as well. And as we gear towards trying to promote responsible borrowing and perhaps accountability in every single process and ensuring that Africa is able to, be as independent as possible and maybe even just make self-decisions and perhaps investments that give back to the continent and every single country that makes up the continent. There's one thing I'm also getting from you, that this is heavily reliant on the decision makers, how they account for the policies that they make and how they implement them, how they operate within the various financial structures within these different countries. And I think now we can just gear a bit towards the political conversation. And right now it's very clear that there are 4 people contesting for office right now within Kenya's political environment. And for very many, I can say it's a 2-horse race. Still, we have those 4 parties and various coalitions that have been formed around this with various manifestos on how they're planning to manage debt, on how they're planning to manage, financial affairs in the country and ensure that the country is able to reach where it wants to be when it comes to national development. In your view, to what extent are their manifestos similar? Do they seem to be responding to the citizen needs? Do they seem to be responding to public debt and finance management? What do you think?
Right. Lurita, I like that question. I'd like to just stress one thing about the global financial system. African countries are independent, and the debt crisis is due to imprudent borrowing. And in Kenya's case, it's been driven by really we call it the kleptonomy, because we have a kleptocracy that's subverted our budgeting process to be able to borrow imprudently. So corruption has driven Kenya's debt crisis. Now, the weakness in the global financial system comes in 2 ways. One, in the commercial side of borrowing, where no questions are asked. And there's an assumption that the government has complied with whatever rules, and there is no burden on the lender to ensure that compliance has taken place. And there's also not sufficient redress, even though in Mozambique we saw that, with enough determination, you can actually prosecute some of these things in the international. Actually, it was a local courts, but not enough responsibility is being placed on commercial lenders, and so we have a lot of predatory borrowing there. I think the second aspect of the global financial system, of course, is the IMF and the conditionalities and the way it conducts itself within the individual countries. And what we have found in our case is there are some strengths in the IMF program. The IMF program has come with a lot of demands for transparency and accountability. There's been some effort to engage civil society, but at the same time we found that the IMF has really kind of broken its back, leaned over backwards to accommodate the perspectives and demands of the Treasury. And in our view, our Treasury is not accountable, hasn't given a clear picture of what the situation is. And in fact, as time has evolved, we've been borne, our concerns have been borne out. So that's the global financial system. African countries have a responsibility to be accountable to their citizens, but by the same token, we need accountability of international lenders and more accountability and checks and balances on the role of the IMF and the World Bank when they work in the country, because they work heavily with the executive and certain aspects of the executive with an assumption that the accountability system is working. And in fact, in Kenya, we believe we might even be able to make a case that there has been odious debt. That aside, the question of the manifestos, it's very ironic. We've got an election that Kenyans are not happy about because we are being forced to choose between two main contenders, both of whom have major governance, have governance concerns for different reasons. On one side, we've got the incumbent president who's managed to situate himself as party leader, party leader of one of the coalitions. And this coalition is then fronted by democracy and human rights champions. And in fact, the deputy presidential aspirant there is a anti-corruption crusader. So you then have a party that has this contradictions within itself. Kenyans are very unhappy with the incumbent, and we're very intent on voting out the incumbent because of mismanaging the economy, but they've managed to remake themselves. That said, the manifesto is very transformative in terms of the economic proposals, and that's a big win for Kenyans. That manifesto on the Azimio side is also grounded in democracy, human rights, social justice, another big win for Kenyans. And it also makes some commitments around corruption, of the fight against corruption and promotion of accountability, which are promises that we need to bring to bear. But of course, the concern is if the president who is really responsible for the mismanagement of the economy has then joined this party, what does it mean if this party comes to power? On the other hand, we've got a very interesting and very proactive manifesto under the UDA coalition with very progressive economic proposals, very similar to the Azimio's. Azimio takes a social development approach with a strong welfare component. UDA takes very much an enterprise approach, but they have the same priorities. They're saying the same thing, which is we must spend in agriculture, where a majority of Kenyans are employed. We must link agriculture to manufacturing, to the external markets. We must put enough money there. We must stress on the use of technology. We must stress on education. So really they have the same priorities, slightly different approach, and those so a big win. So for us as a coalition, big win, because they're talking about fundamental transformation of Kenya's economy. And so that's great. The problem, of course, with the UDA side is that the leadership there has a lot of corruption and integrity concerns. The deputy presidential aspirant on the UDA side has an active case in court. And so even if you look at the manifesto is not express on fighting corruption through leadership and integrity. And in fact, they talk about fighting corruption through strengthening of institutions, which is really they restate what's already in the Constitution. So on that side, we don't have, much, anything to encourage us or make us believe that there'll be a impartial, robust fight against corruption, because those who are leading the party have an interest in subverting the legal processes. Otherwise, they'll be removed. And then also on that manifesto, one of the with the UDA, one of the concerns, of course, William Ruto is the present deputy president, responsible for the present crisis we have. Mm-hmm. But also the concern is they are not couched in values of democracy, human rights, social justice, and they are talking about a rules-based kind of society, whereas the Azimio are talking about a values-based. Now, when you talk about a rules-based society without democracy, human rights, then you're really talking about an authoritarian kind of system. So we have some similarities, but we also have very, considerable differences that will force us as civil society to really consider what's our role. A lot of what we've been agitating for has been taken up by governments in terms of substantive economic proposals. Their diagnosis of the problem and their proposals for the solution are spot on. So a lot of the Okoa Uchumi agenda, we can say, is already on board. But we know that we have a problem in Kenya of implementation and accountability. So we need to figure out how do we work with whichever party will come in, by working with the leading party, working with the opposition party, to make sure those promises are brought to bear and make sure the transparency and accountability agenda isn't lost. There's a false dichotomy being put forward in some circles where they say, well, it's developments, by the government and kind of this benevolent dictator, benevolent authoritarian system being touted. So we really need to reorganize ourselves, because political parties have just kind of upped the playing field by putting really good proposals on the table. Are we up to it? We need to make sure we get up to game. The other thing is the public have really bought these agendas. And so if we go to the public and start saying, well, there's a total governance problem, they're likely to turn around and say, well, government is going to be spending on agriculture, so we can deal with corruption issues and governance issues down the line, because we're going to be getting direct benefits, we're going to be getting welfare benefits, we're going to be getting credit. So we really need to think how we keep the governance agenda on the table when both sides have put a very strong developmental agenda on the table.
Still stressing on the issue of the governance agenda, and really how different leaders are coming in now, and there's a complete change of leadership that's coming up. If we look at the economic situation in Kenya right now, we're talking about an 8.5 trillion debt. And the first order of business of the new government will have to be dealing with this specific kind of debt. From where you sit, do you get a sense that the government is ready, and whether they have a real and genuine plan on how they're planning to deal with the debt crisis? And are they really able to remedy this problem and make sure that the country moves in the right direction? Do you get that feel at all?
The sense I get on one hand is yes, and then on another hand is no.
Okay.
First of all, we won't have a complete change. Because all the political actors are already in the political arena in one way or the other. But we do expect to have a replenishment, especially at the governor, at the sub-national level and also at the parliamentary level. So it's not a complete change. These are pretty much the same political actors, but they have a new message for us, a new package, and that package gives us some good promises. So are they dealing with the debt problem? I say yes and no. One, they are aware of it. They are proposing in the short to mid-term practical solutions for the redressing of the debt problem. Because what they are saying is we need to curb the wasteful expenditure. We need to reprioritize where we are spending the money, and we need to grow the economy. Both are saying that, which is great in the maybe short to mid-term, as you turn things around. Yeah. The gap is in the immediate.
Okay.
When they come in and they are tied to contracts that are wasteful, when they come in and they are tied to debt repayments, I mean, Azimio is on record saying they are going to renegotiate. So we have no doubt they will, but they're going to find themselves tied to some of these projects that maybe have legal implications. So yes, I think both sides are giving us a proper remedy for the mid-term resolution of debt. None of them have given us a very clear picture of the immediate, first 100 days. They're all talking about restructuring parastatals, curbing waste. All those things are very important. So what does that look like? They've left themselves a little bit of political leeway to first get into office.
Yeah.
And then now begin making hard decisions, some of which will entail renegotiations, which are very touchy. Others of which might require some projects to be slowed down in terms of the expenditure outlay, and those are very political, discussions. So, will they go through with it? They don't have a choice. I think in the midterm they have to grow the economy. But like I said, the problem in Kenya is the political culture, and as civil society, I think it's our job and media and religious and business to hold government to account for the promises they have made. So yeah, I'm reasonably happy with the manifestos. They are well crafted, they are alive to the issues, but our problem remains the political culture, and it's to that we must apply ourselves.
Still on that issue of the political culture, I just want us to move briefly from the politicians and I'll move to the citizens. You work a lot with citizens as well, and in really trying to ensure that their voice is actively incorporated into decision-making processes and even just the management of debt, public finance in general, and all that. When you look at the citizens you've been able to interact with, how would you assess their understanding of the correlation between who they vote for, the public debt situation in the country, and their individual conditions of life, or rather the increasing cost of living in the country? How do you assess their understanding of these issues? And are they able to even participate in any kind of interventions that seek to bring them closer towards managing public debt as key stakeholders in the economy?
I think research shows us Kenyans know that debt has been mismanaged. A study that was done by Infotrack I'm trying to remember whether it was end of 2020 or early 2021, and I think it was something like 50 to 60% of Kenyans knew debt has been mismanaged. It's a problem. A higher number, I think maybe as high as 80%, 85%, feel the country is moving in the wrong direction. So no, Kenyans are very aware. They might not have the nitty-gritty, but they know, they can see. Because media has done its job, civil society has done its job in highlighting runaway debt. Citizens and their involvement in public debt, this is a space that has very little oversight in Kenya. There's a lacuna in the constitution that has been exploited by the Treasury, and all the Treasury need get is the approval of the debt ceiling. So once the debt ceiling has been approved, There is no other oversight, approval role that Parliament plays. In fact, Parliament will then only receive the reports, and those reports have been coming late. But thanks to the IMF program, the reporting on public debt has improved massively in the past year and a half. So, are citizens capable of, are they linking the economic realities with the political leadership? This is a big debate in Kenya as well. You know, do Kenyans get the leaders they deserve, or is the problem with our leaders? And I would say citizens make choices, make practical, pragmatic choices based on the system they are working in. And our electoral system is very badly broken in that we have a lot of rules, a lot of institutions, very high aspirations, but we do not have our electoral system is not able to deliver free, fair, and credible results. And in fact, we've had a challenge of our elections for the last 2 cycles. The previous cycle before that, unfortunately, we had, almost brought us to civil war. So elections are a very weak link in Kenya's governance. Like I said, the political culture, we have a dominant political culture of impunity where those in political office are able to benefit from public resources. This creates an incentive for them to undermine institutions, PFM institutions, electoral institutions. This is what our 2010 constitution seeks to cure, and we haven't managed to cure that problem. So Kenya is a paradox. Very progressive country on one hand with very progressive laws, but in many ways some of the worst excesses of corruption, patronage, abuse of law are still very prevalent in our public culture. Now, unfortunately, with our civic culture, we are almost beginning to ingrain a culture, we have a culture of dependency, and we're almost beginning to ingrain the culture of corruption. And during the Change the Constitution process called the BBI, there was a recognition that we need to deal with our national culture, because corruption is the way people do business and it's becoming accepted, and young people have no problem with corruption or how they make money. Yeah. So I wouldn't blame the citizen. I think we have a social challenge, a cultural challenge that we need to deal with.
Okay, let me just bring in something interesting. So at the beginning of the year, TISA was conducting research on citizen participation in public finance management with respect to the informal sector. I was actually part of the team doing the qualitative research towards the beginning of this year. And one interesting finding that we got is that half the people within informal sectors, Kibra, all the way to all the kind of informal sectors that directly align with Kibra, have not been able to interact with their leaders about public finance management issues. So they don't even know where they need to vent. They don't even know what they need to know about public finance management. They have no idea on how they can make sure that their petitions go through, or sometimes they don't even get responses from their MCAs to their MPs to even the higher level. And I just want to throw this back to you. Do you actually think that the political class who are leading the citizens are in touch with the kind of issues that they're experiencing when it comes to the effects happening in the economy and how their livelihoods are directly affected by their economic decisions?
Of course they are. The political class knows. The political class does engage with the citizens. They might not do so through the formal public finance processes, because those are kind of, Kenya is in a captured kind of state situation. So you may engage through the formal processes, but it may not give you the results. So no, our politicians engage on the ground. They are very well mobilized and they know what's going on. And if you hear them speak, they know the issues. The problem is between knowing and doing, and are there sufficient incentives and checks and balances on our politicians to hold them to account, on our public service and politicians to hold them to account? Let me put it very clearly. We are coming out of a regime that has mismanaged the economy, that has undermined state processes, PFM processes, oversight processes, has weakened institutions. So what's going on in Kenya is not a surprise. It's not that Kenyans are bad and what. No, we've had a failure of leadership. And the policies of the Jubilee administration have been totally bankrupt and have bankrupted the country. It's that simple. And that trickles down all the way. Now, the reason I say this is that our leaders do know is because in places, especially at the county level, where you have accountable and progressive governors, they are very responsive. And so at county level, you have a different picture where you see developments in agriculture, developments in healthcare, in certain counties, not all. So our biggest problem is the problem of leadership and leadership accountability and holding leaders to account and placing checks and balances on our leaders. And the debt problem is merely a symptom of the failure of leadership. That is why Okoa Uchumi is very committed to pushing for accountability and the political engagement, because matters, I say our public finance management system is broken. It's broken because it fails to hold the political leadership to account. Starting from the president to the treasury. These are the two most important offices in deciding how Kenya borrows at present. And there's no check and balance on them, and they have run us to the ground.
Okay. Wanjiru, I love this conversation so much and would really like to go on with it, but as we get towards the end of this conversation, you've been able to talk about transparency, accountability, and making sure that all efforts are deliberate towards ensuring this, and that's the only way to make sure that we're able to get into the journey of proper national development when it comes to financial matters and managing the debt crisis that we're at. So do you have any parting shot touching on perhaps demands from the Okoa Uchumi journey and how public debt should be managed in Kenya, how citizens should participate in claiming their rights in this issue, and really how different stakeholders should collaborate and ensure that debt is actually managed appropriately and preventing the country from a brink of disaster?
Right, thank you. And in fact, in your question, you've framed, the demands very well. Mm-hmm. And so I'll just add on to that to say something James Muraguri, ED of IPFK, says that Kenya doesn't have a debt problem. We have an expenditure crisis. And this expenditure crisis has been driven by abuse of the expenditure ceilings. Because you're supposed to have an expenditure to GDP ratio of 3.5% according to the East African Community. Kenya is at 8% and has been playing at that level. So what are you saying? How will you not get into a debt crisis if you overspend? And the return on investment has not been proved. So what we'd like to see with the incoming administration is we need to audit these projects. We need to see where this money has gone. We need to ensure that additional resources are put in to places where there is a return to the citizen, value for money. We need to hold those who have violated the PFM systems to account. And then we need to get citizens onto this conversation. We need to restart our civic education because the Jubilee administration torpedoed public participation, engagement with civil society, and just frustrated civic education. So our citizens are educated by media, but not through deliberate, intentional civic education. And they're also educated by civil society, but civil society programs are really small because government has not supported the civic education process. So we need transformative education. Everyone's now talking about education in critical consciousness, decolonizing education. That's the kind of political voter education that we need to create very critically aware and active citizens who are able to contribute positively as part of their civic, a robust civic culture. So we're happy with the manifestos, but the proof of it is going to be in what they get to do. And we need accountability for our resources, and we need our citizens brought into the agenda in a meaningful way.
Thank you very much for listening. And if you enjoyed our show, please rate and review us on all our podcast platforms, and be sure to come back for a discussion on our next episode. This is Lurit, and I have been your host. Stay well, and just a quick reminder to all Africans, we decide what our systems will look like by ensuring that the right leadership is taking up the right spaces. And do not forget that this is Africa, rewriting her story as a rule maker and not a rule taker.